Hello, everyone. My name is Lars Hyland, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Totra. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, and I just want to double check that everyone can see and hear me okay. Do say so in the chat. Please use the chat for introductions as you are, which is fantastic. Good to see a good range of people from around the world on this session, which I'm very excited about. Actually, it's going to be great talking with Josh Bersin. Hi, Josh. How are you doing?
Hey, Lars. Great to see you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Great. What we're going to be talking about is how to build an adaptable learning organization through people, process, and technology. And Josh is a world-renowned expert, really, in this field, and I'm really delighted that you're able to join this session and to give the benefits of your wisdom. So what I'll do is, I think, just quickly cover what we're going to cover today in the next hour. So we're going to be, Josh will be taking us through adaptive learning organizations, what they are and how they're important in the world ahead, and some trends and evidence that adaptable technology is becoming more and more essential to that success. And then I'll take some time just to go through what I think are the three key characteristics of adaptable technology and the importance of aligning learning management, engagement, and performance management all together to really support the employee experience much more effectively than it has been to date. And we'll use some good examples along the way. So, so Josh, any introductory remarks before we get going?
No, except that the word adaptive is a very important word right now, as we're all adapting to everything.
We are indeed.
I'll try to put some context about what it means in this domain. So welcome, everybody. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that's really important in learning and HR and everything that we do is the business context. And the business context that we're in is not just responding to the pandemic, that's a big part of it, but it's a really very long-term 12, 13-year economic cycle that has included digital transformation, globalization, the decomposition of work into smaller elements of work. Now we have remote work, gig work. And so being adaptive, being agile, being responsive to change is now becoming very common. It's not just a good idea. It's basically what everybody's been doing since the pandemic started. And if you go to the next slide, Lars, the way I look at it is everything that you do in L&D or in HR or in talent management is in response to things going on in the company, the business, the economy, the marketplace, the customer set. So I don't know where you guys are on the left. Each of your companies are in different industries, but every industry has been going through a variety of things to deal with the pandemic. And by the way, right before the pandemic, there was plenty of transformation going on there. And now we have all these things on the right. And you know, skills is a big piece of it, and it's going to get a lot worse. And let me show you why. If you go to the next slide, the job market is explosive. Now, I don't necessarily put complete credibility in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. It's kind of not super good data, but if you look at LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, MZ, Burning Glass, you see the real data, which is a massive increase in hiring. 26% more jobs open now in the US and Canada than a year ago. Transportation, logistics, healthcare, customer service, and of course, sales, marketing, all the typical things. And what that has created is a scramble for talent and a scramble for skills. If you go to the next slide, this is some data from 7 or 8 very large, well-known brands. I took the company names off. And what you see is they are, first of all, they're recruiting a lot. A lot of these HR people told me that their recruiters have 60 to 70 job recs per recruiter, which is a lot, and that at least half of their recruiting is now internal because there aren't enough people on the outside job market. I'm going to post some more research in the next couple of weeks on this, but one of the economists I talked to made the comment that the luxury of posting a job and seeing people apply may be over. You may be posting jobs and nobody will apply. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's the world we're going to be in. And let me show you the sort of the ground force, ground level view of that on the next slide. This is research from IBM that happened last year. Roughly a quarter of the workforce changed companies, or a quarter of the workforce changed occupations. My research shows that 40% of the workforce changed jobs, roles, or managers, which means they changed companies or jobs or roles inside of the company. And, you know, women were disaffected much more than men because of the issues with families. And then there's the issue of the diversity and inclusion and other things. So what we're going to be dealing with for the next couple of years is the following picture. And let me take 1 minute on this, Lars. I like to do visual stuff, and go to the next slide. You know, sometimes I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. All of these things are colliding at the same time. On the left, we have a labor shortage or a skills shortage. We need more diverse sources of labor, and of course, people coming from different locations. The number 2 most common location in job descriptions on LinkedIn now is remote. Number 1 is headquarters. Number 2 is remote. Remote is now an official job location. So we have gig work, contract work. We need to build better employee experiences so people don't leave. We need to understand what the well-being issues are. We need to move people around more developmentally, internally. We need a way to understand the new skills. The job architecture is not kept up. And then we have the issue of the leadership pipeline. So I think if you're an HR person or an L&D person, you should take this picture, put it on the wall or some version of it that you like, and talk about it as a group. Because my guess is you're going to be working on all of these things. So let's talk about corporate training. So
before we do, Josh, just a quick question: are those stats worldwide or for one particular region? That was a question from Linda.
They're pretty global. You know, I'm on the phone with companies from all over the world. You know, it turns out that in some parts of the world, the skills are more, you know, skills are not evenly distributed. You know, some of the best data scientists and software engineers are like in Russia or Eastern Europe. But now that everything's so transparent and so mobile, I think it's pretty common. The developed economies are under more stress than the underdeveloped economies, but Africa and India are going to be going through this too, just in a slightly different way.
Great, thank you.
China, I'm not too familiar with, but you know, if anybody wants to talk to me about China, I'd love to hear.
If anyone's listening, yeah, that'd be good to share.
Okay, let's talk about learning. So next slide. So let's follow so this is my picture. I kind of play with this picture constantly, but learning, the training function, the training industry is a massive industry. It's 200 and some odd $billion. Very, very big part of business. It never really goes away, even under recession. You know, I was just on the phone with one of the largest investment banks very early this morning, and you know, at least half an hour was spent on the onboarding program that they're trying to do as they hire more kids from college. And we're in a world where we've gone from, you know, traditionally learning SCORM-based content to talent-driven learning, which was the sort of the LMS market of, you know, maybe a decade ago, to all forms of digital content, you know, videos, articles, podcasts, you know, maybe eventually TikToks, you know, everything you can possibly think of, you know, conversational stuff, games, VR. And now, you know, really putting that into the flow of work and giving people context for it so that they don't just see a stream of content and they search, but they get recommended content that they need based on their job. And I'm going to talk about a couple of Totara clients I talked to that are doing this. And the big, you know, direction that I would encourage you to think about is not just delivering a lot of content with a lot of great learning paths, but focusing on business capabilities. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And most people are somewhere in here. Learning in the flow of work was an idea I kind of hatched about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's now literally happening in more than a third of companies through Microsoft Teams or Slack or other tools. But you have to focus on business capabilities, because randomly improving skills doesn't necessarily improve the company's performance unless it's directed toward the things that the company, strategically needs to do to differentiate itself. And, let's go to the next slide. For you that are L&D people, you've been going through a lot of transformation too. I have become an educator. My latest business life has been about building an academy. And, and I think all of you are seeing plenty of opportunities to upskill yourself, change your role, learn about journeys, learn about data, learn about experience design, learn about capabilities versus skills. And I'll touch on that. We can talk about it there in the Q&A. And of course, a lot of that is the technology market that's changed too. If we look at learning tech, let's go to the following slide. The big theme, go ahead and build this out, has been, creating tools and systems that are not, interruptions from work, but are basically work tech, tools that help you get your job done. Like one of the customers I'm going to talk about near the end is Western Union. Western Union is a huge Totara customer. They use Totara for all sorts of compliance training and operational training. And the learning programs are actually invoked by employees as they use the Western Union money services. It somehow, I don't know how it does it. I'm sure, Lars, you know how it does it. It somehow sends a message or something over to the learning system and shows the things that people need to learn. That's really where this has to go. Now, the complexity for people in learning is there's a lot of these tools. If you go to the next slide, I look at a lot of research, and this is a year or two old, but the last study that came out on the number of learning tools companies have was that the average company had 23. I was on the phone with Walmart 6 months ago. They had 80 learning management systems, 80 platforms, and then God knows how many tools on top of that. So one of the reasons that I like Totara, and I think companies like Totara are so important, is they can consolidate a lot of this technology into one place. So you don't have to spend most of your time figuring out, how to get these things to work together. That is never going to completely go away in learning, but it's getting better.
Yeah.
Now,
Josh, one comment on that, about you got a stat there of 38% of LMS users want to improve the user experience. We ran an LMS satisfaction survey just recently, and it was very interesting to see that there'd been a shift from the historic sort of very low negative NPS scores almost that a lot of platforms have had, and it's now moved positive, which is good to
wow,
good to have
that's
seen.
a big change. This is a couple years old. That's great to hear. Well, I think being an LMS provider has been a challenge. If you look at the older companies, Saba, which was acquired, and SuccessFactors, they've struggled, honestly, to keep their systems current. And you guys have done a really an amazing job. I mean, I'm just, complete fan of what you guys have done at Totara.
Thanks. Josh, just one quick question. Sorry, I'm interrupting you here, but there's a question that seems relevant from Jose. Have you got some examples of an invisible LMS environment, and they're looking to head in that direction?
I mean, most LMSs are invisible these days.
Yeah.
Most companies use something like an LXP or a front end where you don't really see the LMS. I mean, the two clients I'm going to talk about at the end, the USDA and the Western Union guys, both have hundreds of. Western Union has 400,000 users. USDA has 140,000 users. 2,000 administrators, I think, is the number, administering these systems. They've got people in the forests. They've got people in trucks. They've got firemen. They've got people in all sorts of operational jobs who have to take training. They're not logging into the LMS, clicking around. They're getting it as needed through their phones, through their front-end experiences, through their portals. So I think actually the majority of companies have given up on the LMS course catalog being the primary interface, and they've built something on top of it, which you guys have done too. So
yeah, we can come on to that.
It's kind of a big change in the market.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of adaptability, let's talk about that for a sec. Let me take 1 minute on this. I put together a pretty good 30-minute podcast on this over the weekend. And if you want to really get into what this is all about, please go listen to that. You might find it helpful. But basically what's going on is every vendor in the market has a skills taxonomy engine that tries to categorize skills. And you can do this by hand. But the problem with the skills taxonomies is there's tens of thousands of skills. Every word that describes a piece of content or a piece of your job is essentially a skill. So what I try to advise companies to do, and we've been doing this with quite a few organizations, is use the technology like Totara to organize content in roles and provide recommendations based on skills, but also separate from that, have some business conversations about the strategic capabilities you need. We have a great example of that in our capability model for HR. We can talk about that during the Q&A,
Yeah.
but building an electric car, for example, is a capability. Understanding how motors work might be a skill. Understanding voltage might be a skill, but that doesn't mean you can develop an electric car. So whatever business you're in, you're going to find that your business capabilities are more complex than each individual skill. And that's really what's going on right now, is companies grappling with this. And, the technology market is very layered on this. Let's not spend a lot of time on this chart because I want to talk more about adaptive learning.
Yeah.
But really, in a sense, Totara is really all of this together. And so you have many pieces of the technology infrastructure to do this. So let's skip ahead and talk about what adaptive learning is. I want to focus on the topic. Okay. So before I get into the learning research, we did a study last year on adaptive organizations. And we looked at about 600 or 700 companies and what they were doing to respond to the pandemic. And what we found was that, there was a pretty big variation in what they were doing. And the ones that were the most adaptive were focused on workforce transformation, health and support of individuals, mission and purpose, and continuous reskilling. But there were a good 50 to 60% of companies that were not responding very well. And that was because they weren't adapting the human capital practices fast enough. I mean, you can come up with a new business model or a new way of serving customers, but if the people can't, adapt fast enough, they won't react well. And this, by the way, this study is available on our website. It's called Business Resilience. If you can't find it, we're not charging for it. It's free if you want to read through it. It's got all sorts of things in it. Relative to L&D, we did a study on the L&D part of this. So let's go to the next chart. Basically, we sat down with some consultants and we said, look, of all of the things that learning people do, learning and talent people, but to some degree it's learning people, what are all of the things that create responsive, adaptive, high-performing learning and talent solutions? And we did a big survey. We had some very large companies respond, and we prioritized, of all of the practices we asked, what were the things that seemed to create adaptive organizations? And these are the 15 things. I forgot how many they were. And you can see what they are. They fall into three categories. Number one is sensing or alignment. Now, when I did my research on, I wrote a book on learning measurement many years ago. And basically what I realized in learning measurement is that one of the biggest measures of effective learning is alignment. Did this learning actually solve the problem it was supposed to solve? Does it align the business needs? Is it relevant to the workplace role of the person taking it? And so those green things at the top have to do with alignment, and you have to stay aligned with learning because there's an unlimited demand for learning. I mean, you can sit around all day and get inquiries. We want a course on this, we want a course on that. So that's number one, those 5 things. The second is how decisions are made. How do you decide where to spend your money, your time, your energy? what programs get high amounts of money, what programs get low amounts of money, what's insourced versus outsourced. Should we develop ourselves? Should we buy it off the shelf? Should we build an academy on this topic, or should we just develop one course and be done with it? You know, those are constant discussions and decisions that have to be made, and that's in the orange area. And then in the purple area at the bottom, how well are you adapting to the future of technology and business practices? And that's not just, you know, buying Totara and upgrading your content development tools, but also, do you understand the concepts of design thinking? Are you developing content that can be delivered in the flow of work? Are you thinking about micro learning versus macro learning? Do you have an experienced design methodology where you can have a learning experience that follows somebody through their career path or their development path? And are you agile? Can you iterate and fix things quickly, or are you one of these, you know, kind of publish and move on organizations? So what we found on the next chart was that, you know, there's quite a bit of variation. There are companies that are very traditional. I mean, first of all, everybody is moving in this direction, so there's no lack of interest in all of these topics. But when we went through these, you know, 50 or 60 of the largest companies in the study, and we looked at their financial performance, their Glassdoor ratings, the talent measures like retention, engagement, productivity, and so forth, we found that in almost every case, the high performers, the blue ones, were much more agile than the black ones. And when I won't mention the names of the companies, but the companies that were in the black lines tended to be very traditional organizations. They might have been in the transportation or energy industry. They were not dealing with rapid technology changes at the rate of speed of, say, a software company or a financial services company or a consulting firm, but they felt the same problems. You know, there's no industries left that don't need this. You know, you go to a utility, their technology is changing just as fast as a tech company. You go to an oil company, you know, and I was just on the phone with an oil company yesterday. They're worried about solar energy. They're worried about hydrogen fuel, you know, different sources of oil and other hydrocarbons. They got a lot of technology and skills development to do too. It's not just about driving, you know, sort of ships around and delivering oil from place to place. So, and you can see based on the sort of differences between black and blue, which areas had the biggest differentiation. Data is very high, the fourth or fifth one down, that's a really important one. The skills of, I don't know if you guys can see, you probably can't see my pointer, but the one called define skills and capabilities. Skills of your team are really a big issue. You guys have to continuously reskill yourselves. Internal mobility is the one that's all blue and no black. Dealing with continuous learning was the other one that was all blue and all black. The traditional companies were much more into, here's a course, go take it when we tell you to take it. And then the learning in the flow of work is the other one that was all blue and no black. So, so this is, you know, sort of, to me, as much proof as you can get that these aren't just nice things to think about. Now, let me just go through one more point and then we'll open it to Q&A. How do you do this? Many, many ways. There's sort of the continuous upskilling of your team and how you're organized. But I think one way to do it also is to think about, you know, business capabilities, and we'll talk about this during the Q&A, and organize yourself around what I call capability academies. And I, you know, use the word academy because it was the only word I could think of. It's not a corporate university, because a university is sort of a little more like a shopping place where you go shop for stuff. It's not a place to shop for stuff. It's a place where you know you're going to build capabilities in a given area. And you don't need a capability academy for every topic in the company, but most companies have a leadership academy. Most companies have a sales academy. You might need a supply chain academy if you're in the logistics business. You might need a safety academy if you're in construction. You know, I've seen all different kinds of these things, and they are integrated experiences that go beyond content to include developmental planning, assessment, third-party instructors, outside speakers, you know, innovation from inside the company and so forth. And if you want a little proof on this, let's go to the next chart. This is one of my favorite books of last year, or maybe it was the year before. This guy, I don't know, I think he's a researcher. I'm not sure he even comes from L&D. He looked at the characteristics of high-performing business professionals, politicians, entertainers, musicians, artists, and he studied how they got really, really, really good at their craft. And what he found was that it wasn't deep expertise, it was horizontal. It was jumping around and trying a lot of things. It was the cross part of the T. And sports journalist, great. I didn't know that. Well, anyway, he's a good writer. And what I took away from that is something that I've seen in my career and my own personal career is we need to give people a range of opportunities, not just deeper and deeper and deeper skills development in one area. And that begs the question of, does your platform and the experience you've created deliver that? So let me go just one more chart, Lars, and then we'll talk about Q&A. Let's skip this one. Let me talk about the two clients that I talked to that are Totara clients. And, you know, there's a lot of learning technology companies. I don't even know how many anymore. I used to keep track of everybody. But when I, you know, first came across Totara and, you know, talked to Lars and Gordon and other people there, you know, I was sort of astounded at a couple things. One is it's a really flexible system, you know, in the sense that almost every part of it can be configured and customized. It's very scalable, and it has been designed for this complex agile world. And let me mention these two companies that I interviewed. Western Union, you guys know who they are, very big company. 400,000 people are taking courses in Western Union. As I was interviewing the guy who runs this system, I think he's in somewhere in Eastern Europe. I don't know where he is.
That's right.
Yeah. He's quite a character. We had a really interesting conversation, but they have every possible use case of learning you could imagine. And they've done it before Totara. They had a whole smattering of little things sprinkled around, and he swears by it. The USDA is another very interesting one. The USDA is a very, very large government agency. It has the Forest Service and health safety, food safety, all sorts of things in it. And they teach everybody from how to use everything from how to use a chainsaw, how to do food safety policies, obviously career things, HR, IT things. And because the federal government is such a sort of disparate, you know, confederation of agencies, they have something like a dozen or 24 PeopleSoft systems for HR. There's no single system of record for, you know, where all the people are and who they report to. Totara is that system. He said, it is the only system we have that has everybody in it, that we can see what they're doing, what their job roles are, and what their learning and career paths have to be. And as you can see, it's a highly distributed administration with 2,000 admins. Now, I'm sure, Lars, you know a lot more about it than I do. But to me, this is an example of why a platform like Totara allows you to be agile. Because I've found in, you know, most of the research I've done and a lot of the companies I've talked to over the years is what the big problem with learning platforms is they have a lot of features and they have a lot of workflows, but they were designed by somebody, some product manager, for some customer, for some application, and then it doesn't work for you. There's something about it that's just not right. It's missing something. It doesn't have e-commerce. It doesn't have the right distributed domain management, whatever. And so you end up, you know, knocking your head against the wall, trying to get this piece of software to do what you want it to do. And the vendor, as in their own, you know, best efforts, cannot accommodate what everybody wants because they didn't design the system to be adaptive. And I think this is a huge benefit of Totara is, from what I know, and Lars, you can tell us a lot more about how you do this. This is a very adaptive platform, and it allows you to deliver learning in many, many formats, in many modalities, and in many experiences without buying 50 tools and then lashing them all together. So I'll stop there.
Indeed. Well, thanks, Josh. And yeah, I'll put some flesh on the bones of that. But it's been great to, have that insight from your perspective when talking to, some of our customers, in particular these two, Western Union and USDA. That's really, really interesting. So yeah, I mean, we'll take a question now. I think we've had quite a few come in, Josh, which is good. But just one question here from Douglas, which is: are large companies in number of staff typically less agile than small ones?
No, that's an interesting question. Actually, I think it's a little bit funny. Very small companies are very agile because there's usually like, two people in training and they just do what needs to be done. And then somewhere around the mid-sized range of a company, there's a head of L&D and there's a learning platform and there's a learning catalog. And things get very difficult because, somewhere around 1,000 employees and maybe 1,000 to 5,000 employees, you've got the typical sales, IT, compliance, diversity, harassment training, and then you've got a new program on this and a new program on that, a new program on this, and the L&D department oftentimes is not big enough to adapt. But the larger the company gets, the more likely it is that you'll end up with distributed training groups. You'll end up with one group in Europe doing their own thing, another group here doing their own thing, and then it becomes highly adaptive, but it becomes a little bit chaotic. So bigger companies have the opportunity to create what I call a federated model, where there's a clear set of common tools and systems, and then a delegated authority for people to do things locally as needed. So it isn't directly related to to size, but that tends to be what I've found.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. We've got plenty of other questions, but I'm going to save them for our Q&A just near the end. So thanks, Josh. I'm going to now take a moment just to go through what I think are 3 characteristics of adaptable technology. So first one, it's another way of saying adaptable. Arguably, it's molding to your organization. So the technology itself, when you look at the system, often traditional approaches to technology can be too brittle, perhaps even resistance to change. You see a lot of challenges in IT projects over the years, and while doing those sorts of projects are very worthwhile, particularly in stable conditions, when things start to get changeable, and boy, are they changeable right now, and going forward, that, well, how are you going to cope when your business needs to change? And that planning horizon that we perhaps had a few years back of maybe looking out 3 years ahead or 5 years, well, 3 years, 2 years, probably shrunk to months now, if a quarter. So, what happens when your organization starts to restructure or needs to restructure in face of some big market change, or there's a merger or an acquisition, or you need to extend out to audiences outside your core business, which I think is increasingly needed, particularly when we're looking to connect with resellers and our customers even digitally, and a big part of that is about educating and supporting them through it. So, learning technology plays a role in that. And then critically, how does your business integrate with other systems, critical systems that your organization runs on? So that's a key thing to be thinking about when investing in technology, that it will mold around your organization. And one thing to look at there in terms of integrations technically is, what are the APIs? What sort of import export options do you have available to you in those platforms? Do you have the option of being able to custom integrate with another system at the time that you need to, and still be able to keep in good lockstep with the core platform's roadmap and development, and other aspects like SSO and shared authentication, other things that perhaps we expect from all systems now these days. But it's very important to have that level of control, I think, going forward when you're in such variable times. The other aspect of this is about engagement and feeling that the systems you're using are part of you and your organization, and that often comes down to the theming and the branding that it looks like. So you don't want something that's particularly generic. And sometimes when you head down certain sort of SaaS cloud routes, you may have limited options in those areas, and that can be a detriment to your ultimate brand and the effectiveness that you want to generate, especially when you're reaching out to wider audiences. So just looking back at Western Union, they tailored the system dramatically, Totra, to their audience. And indeed, you can see, as Josh mentioned, they had particular integrations with their POS systems, their point of sale systems, to be able to really bring learning at the point of need. And not only that, being able to differentiate the look and feel sufficiently to meet different audiences. So whether it's agents or partners in this case. But when you look at adaptable systems properly, you can see that the systems themselves can really change dramatically. So you're just looking here at another example, the American Cancer Society training 3 million volunteers over a period of time. They have a particular soft, welcoming sort of presentation to the content and system. Shimano, the bike professional manufacturers, they're reaching out to resellers and maintenance shops around the world. A mobile, very simple, very elegant branded solution for their needs. Toyota, Lexus, a completely different look and feel, both on mobile and on platform, standard platforms. The Humanitarian Leadership Academy. I'm flicking through an example, a whole load of examples here, just to give you the sense that a system that is flexible can really meet very different needs. And when you're a sizable organization, you can even start to break that down into the various functions across your organization and help personalize that even further. Another example, Weller, very consumer-oriented brand, very crucial to adoption, was to present their brand cleanly, well, in a very high standard, if you like, from a consumer perspective. Often, for some reason, we think internal audiences are a secondary sort of audience in terms of brand representation. But I don't see why that should be the case. And that said, when you're in other parts of the world, so National Ambulance in United Arab Emirates, different types of designs, quite functional, straightforward one here, really resonated with that audience, and it's good to be able to present it in that form too. Mobile first, and then finally, in this list, a very vibrant example from Tennis Australia there, just again, sort of really representing their brand well. It makes a big difference, I think, in terms of learning engagement and the broader need. Then the third one is about freedom to meet those business changes as they happen. What we do at Totra is we effectively sit at the center of a collaborative innovation network around tens of partners that we have around the world, and they are able to use Totra to really target particular sectors or business needs or regional needs even. And all of this is possible because they have open access to the core platform in very deep ways. And that generates some very strong long-term collective benefits, as examples of innovation that may happen in one area does filter back towards us at the center and ends up being part of the core product in time. So we get this sort of very efficient feedback loop and mechanism to inform the roadmap as we go forward. It does mean that you're also able to unilaterally customize where you need to, and if it's business critical, you need to know you have that freedom to do that, because that's going to sit at the heart of any business differentiation that you have. And if we think about how fast all of the industry sectors are digitalizing, it doesn't matter where you sit now, we're all becoming digital businesses, then the systems you're using really are going to be that more important to the end outcomes for your organization. So yeah, final point about being able to influence the vendor roadmap in not being locked into it, I think is really critical in any decisions going forward about the tools and platforms that you're using. One brief example from last year, we had many of these in the healthcare sector, which Totra is well used in. this one example was in Italy with a healthcare institute there, where just in a matter of 1 month, they had to scale from sizable audience of about 40,000 healthcare workers typically to 450,000 healthcare workers in a month, and being able to roll out ventilator training and other COVID related training very rapidly. And there was no real barrier technically or commercially really to make it happen effectively. So just to echo what Josh is saying about why adaptability matters, we've already heard, I think, about why skills are really crucial. I'm just going to flag this report from the World Economic Forum that laid out a list of what they thought were the most important skills themselves that we should be focusing on going forward. I've picked out one area: resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility, which I think we all feel we've all been stress tested on over the past 12 months or so. But I'd encourage you all to take a closer look at that report, and please get in touch. We can provide you a link to that. And then just also to echo Josh's thoughts on how things are changing. I think expectations are changing in the workplace. So people who are working in organizations of all sorts and shapes and sizes, and especially in the past year, some long-term trends I think have really collapsed in on themselves. So remote working, as Josh was saying, is so we've all experienced it much more deeply and an extended period than we would have done otherwise, and things aren't going to go back to the way they were. So those expectations are shifting, and that employee experience that everyone's going to be demanding, or maybe not demanding, but expecting, is characterized in these ways. So very much of focusing on that coach mentor, being able to have consistent and continuous learning and development opportunities, and really aligning my own individual sense of direction and purpose and goals with the organization that I'm working with. These are all increasingly important, and talent will go elsewhere if they don't see that in the organization they're at. So this has implications for the way organizations are structured, perhaps a shift away from that conventional top-down command and control model towards one that's much more open, that is naturally going to encourage flexibility and adaptive nature. So that in a way, Josh, that might actually look and feel another way of looking at how an adaptive learning organization is structured. Yeah. And this diagram, by the way, comes from Red Hat and their open organization initiatives that they've been doing, which they're obviously very strong advocates of open technology, as we know. And this is my little spin on things when it comes to organizations. If we think of them as adaptable, then we could perhaps think of organizations as murmurations. That picture that you're seeing there is of Brighton Pier, which is literally a stone's throw from where I'm speaking to you from. I'm speaking to you from Brighton, UK. And we get those murmurations a lot out across the year. But essentially, we're all working in concert together, in synchronization together. And perhaps often we're not in synchronization, and that causes a lot of dysfunction in organizations as a result. But if we were able to characterize ourselves and be able to support working in that fashion, it becomes much more suitable to responding and being resilient and adaptable in the environments that we're seeing going forward. And then finally, really, perhaps we're already doing this. When we look at like the world of music, you can see there's classical music, there's jazz. Jazz is almost a musical example of a murmuration, if you like, where music arises, something powerful arises from a freedom and an interdependence of performance going there. So I like to think of, I often ask you the question in the chat, feel free to say whether you feel your organization is more jazz or more classical. It's often interesting answers that we get from that. But I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to just scoot forward here. I think this diagram that you're looking at now characterizes where I hope we're all looking to reach or try and get to, this virtuous cycle of an adaptability friendly workplace, as I like to say, where you've you're working as part of a cohesive team. It does work well together. You've got access to the right resources to get your job done just in time when you need it. You're getting the right level of mix of continuous feedback so that you get praised and recognized, but you get course corrected in positive ways as you go, and essentially you're always getting those opportunities to upskill and improve, and that can only help with performance. And this is really what underpins where we have gone with Totara's platform, the talent experience platform, where we've taken what we see and what the evidence shows motivates us in the workplace, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. This comes from an old book now, I say old, 10 years old, from Daniel Pink, Drive, it's called. I'm sure many of you will have heard of it, but it seems more and more relevant now. But mastery being that opportunity to continuously improve your skills, autonomy being the opportunity to exercise those skills without fear, with psychological safety and the right levels of support and space. And then also purpose, being able to be really aligned with the company that you're working for, the team around you, and your own personal values. And if you actually achieve all of those things, and if you can align them together, it's challenging to do, but if you do achieve that, then huge benefits arise, both for the individual, the team, and the wider organization. So that's why we've built what we've built in terms of bringing Totara Learn, Totara Engage, and Totara Perform, which are the component products of the talent experience platform as a whole. And more than welcome you all to have a closer look at that when you can. So just finally, we've already seen a whole bunch of, I think, examples from a visual sense. A lot of those examples were taking advantage of technology flexibility as well throughout the platform that Totara offers. But a couple more examples. eduCare, they're a sizable educational charity. They had the same problem of consolidating multiple platforms, proprietary platforms, into one open solution that could then deliver support to 6,000 differentiated customers around the world. That accumulated up to 500,000 users that they are supporting. And being able to do that in ways that is engaging and generates such a high level of recommendation for their own services is a really positive win for them. And yeah, there's a brief look at how that looks and feels. And finally, just one example here from the UK, the British Dental Association of all things. I think there's been a big rush here in the UK of people flooding back to the dentist, by the way, as we're coming out of lockdown. So I'm glad they're all been busy training on this. So this again has meant that they've been able to shift the type of training that they've been able to offer to really meet changing needs. So we've reached the Q&A time. We've got about 10 minutes. I think left, and we've got a bunch of questions here, Josh.
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm not sure if you were able to look at those while I was talking.
I've been looking at them.
Did any jump out that you'd like to?
Well, I can run through them. LMS versus LXP, they're coming together. It looks like you're going to answer that. Right now, they're separate products, but I think in your case, you guys have sort of the whole thing in one platform.
I think so. I think there's a general trend. I think of my feeling is that the LXP category is quite ill distinct in that there are several things called LXPs, but they offer quite different things sometimes. So it's quite natural for that to be absorbed together into the deeper functionality that's typically available in an LMS.
Okay, let's see. With so many different skills. Okay. The second question from Alex Treasure about different skills models. This is a problem. It's not solved. There's a skills engine in the learning system. There's a skills engine in the recruiting system. There's a skills engine in the talent mobility system if you buy a talent marketplace. What is starting to happen is companies are starting to build tools to centralize these and get rid of the duplicates. Because the problem is you've got a collaboration, teamwork, working in teams. You have different words, referring to the same thing in different systems. And I do think that's an exercise for companies to consider if you're a bigger company and there are more teams working on that. And that's what I talked about in that podcast. So probably not a lot of off-the-shelf solutions yet.
No.
How would you
No.
recommend we track success of training? Well, you could read this book I wrote on it. I mean, there's a million ways to do that. I think the two is, first of all, did they actually take the training, and did they finish it, and did they engage with it? That's always a good sign. And then did they complete it? And then I just ask them net promoter, would they recommend it? I mean, that may sound a little bit simple, but it's more valuable than you realize. People do tend to recommend things that they find valuable, not just entertaining. So, and then you can get into assessment and all sorts of other things, but those tend to be less useful than you might imagine.
Yeah, I'd say as well, if you're bringing together learning and performance management and bringing the learning into the flow of work as well, that's by definition, you're starting to see business. You're using business metrics, aren't you, to measure the success of the training itself? So that's probably where we really should be focused.
Correlate activity against business results, and you can see people who take more of this are better at that, and so forth.
Good. There's a rather detailed question from another Lars from Scania. He's about combining the bank. Great.
I think I have met him.
Excellent.
Okay.
It might be easier to answer that later. I think we'll do that after, if it's a quite specific one.
The question is about the algorithm for the skills engine. I think the simple answer is these are not perfect science yet. These are very young systems, and they're not super sophisticated on recommending content. And so, they probably will recommend reasonably well, but they're not going to tell somebody what they need to do to become better in their career necessarily. There are some technologies that do that. Depending on the vendor you work with, you'll see different levels of maturity there.
Indeed. Thank you. Let's see, another one here from David. Can you please give some examples of learning experience design done really well? And do you view an essential skill for L&D professionals? Well, I mean, hopefully you saw a few examples of some good structure and presentation.
I'll just maybe one example just to get everybody thinking about design. I mean, everybody seems to be working on onboarding or transition types of programs right now because there's so much job mobility. You can think about onboarding in 100 different ways. Is it the first day, the first week, the first month, the first 6 months, the first year? Pick whichever one you want. At Bank of America, they found that in the consumer business, which is 70,000 people, the number one driver of performance is tenure. People tended to leave early. It was too complicated to learn the job. They lost a lot of people in the first 6 months to a year. So the guy that runs their academy there went and looked at all of the interactions that were going on when people left and realized we needed a learning journey that went for a year. We need a year. We need to check in with people at various points so they learn different aspects of this consumer banking business for an entire year. That's an experience design problem. Some situations are much simpler than that, but that's the way I would think about it, is how big of an experience do you need to focus on to get your job done? And that's where you get to be creative and decide.
Yeah, indeed. I've seen increasing examples of some of our customers using more action learning design approaches. So taking some elements of formal directed training and then structuring it as actually a real business challenge or business problem to solve, and using the engage functionality that we have with basically a project workspace, and being able to work on that problem, drawing on the learning, formal learning, but also the informal learning that they're getting from peers and others around the business. And I think that's great because it's very focused around making a tangible difference to the business. I would
encourage people to have unstructured collaborative experiences in learning. You'll be amazed how effective that is. With a little bit of direction, people talking to each other for half an hour or 15 minutes or an hour during a learning experience has a huge impact.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. So moving on. Let's see. So what change needed? Philip is asking, what's the change needed besides the platform's existing tech? Not sure I quite understand the question there, Philippa. If you might want to add a bit more in the chat there. Let's see.
Learning portals versus academies.
Yeah.
Let me take 1 second on this academy idea. Academies don't mean not learning in the flow of work. An academy really means, in some domains, the problem of learning is more than skills. Like in sales, you know, sales is a perfect example. I've been in sales my whole life. You know, you can teach somebody how to use Salesforce. You can teach them about the products. You can teach them about the competitors. You can teach them how to handle objections. You can teach them how to qualify customers. You can teach them how to have meaningful conversations. You can use the challenger sale. You can use the solution sale. There's 100 things you can teach people about sales. Give them all that stuff. They won't go through any of it. They don't even know where to start. You've really got to organize it into a capability development process that helps salespeople at different parts of their career in different roles become ever better at sales, because learning how to become a good salesperson goes on for years and years and years, and you're always learning more about the industry, the products, the competitors, the business models. That's what an academy is. Within an academy, there might be a lot of learning in the flow of work, and there might be a lot of formal courses and informal courses. But it's an organizational entity driven by the business, not just us in L&D, where the business owns it and feels sponsorship for it, as opposed to L&D constantly saying, oh, you need a course on this, you need a course on this. Okay, we'll build this for you. We'll build this for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're just running close to time now, I think, Josh. And thank you everyone for all of those questions. There are still some open. So what we'll do is we'll pick up those questions and we can certainly respond to them after this session. We typically do that in our Totra community. Totra.community is the URL for that. So you can come in for free, and there's a whole wealth of actual learning resources there that you can try, and you can also get a sense also of how Totra looks and feels, because that's actually our platform in action. I'd like to also invite you all to sign up for a demo of the Totra platform, talent experience platform. There's one running on the 28th of April, literally next week. So there's a URL there just on the screen. And Josh, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the Bersin Academy?
Yeah, we have for a couple of you asked about how to learn more about L&D. Join our academy. It's very inexpensive. You can go to bersinacademy.com and kind of browse around and see what's in there. And it's a very collaborative experience, building on a lot of the sort of concepts we've been talking about today, and all different aspects of learning and HR and talent development.
That's great. I can recommend it. I'm in there. It's fantastic. I've learned loads. So great. Thank you, Josh. Thank you everyone for your time this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And yeah, I look forward to reconnecting with you all at a future point. So thanks again for your time.